Now we're taking up exactly where we left off the last day. And Luisa says, then after the confessor went away and I was free, I went back to the state as before. And so it happened that I spent sometimes a week, sometimes 15 days, and even months being surprised by that state. That means suddenly going into ecstasy. Weeks and months at it, imagine. Look at the level of holiness she has. And then during the day, and I was able to free myself by myself. Now, freeing her from coming out of the ecstasy is now a big issue for everybody, not just for Luisa. But when I was discovered, very often, as I said before, my family would call the confessor. More so since they had seen at the first time I had been freed, while everyone believed that I would never again recover from that state. In other words, they've all got to get used to Luisa going into ecstasy. But then I went down to church and I returned to that state again. And so they would call the confessor and I would be freed. However, I would never have imagined that it would take the priest to free me from such a state, or that my trouble was an extraordinary thing. Now, what she's calling her trouble is an ecstasy. Nobody considers her having an absolutely extraordinary experience yet, but they will. And she is sometimes at this particular stage able to come out of it herself. Sometimes she isn't. Now, she's going to go into a stage where she can't come out of it. And it's going to be a huge trial for her. But what the Lord is actually doing, and I want to say this ahead of time so that it'll read normally when we're reading it, what the Lord is doing is forcing the church to get involved. The church is not going to get involved too easily. The church will say, sure, we have loads of people claiming to have visions and all kinds of stuff. And the church can be very blasé about it, you know what I mean? But the Lord's going to force the church to get involved. In other words, force the church to actually have to get this woman out of the ecstasy. And they only have to bless her to do it. But in other words, they have to witness her in ecstasy every single day. And eventually it'll dawn on them. This is not usual. This is not normal. This is totally extraordinary. And gradually, because they have to minister to her, they will eventually realise that there's something going on in this ecstasy that she's not telling us about. In fact, she hasn't told anybody anything yet. And finally, the priest will, as we would say, the penny will drop. And he will say to her, you must write everything down. Now, you will realise the reason why this has been given as continuous text is that they left her in this condition for years without even bothering to say to her, why don't you write down what's happening? And that's why this is distant memory. You have to get to the end of volume 1 before you will get the text and the date, because she'll be writing it on the day she got it. And this is why this is all distant memory for her. And so this is the drama that's going on at the moment. So she said, it's true that when I would lose consciousness or go into ecstasy, that I could see Jesus Christ, but I attributed this to the goodness of the Lord. And when the priest sets her free, she considers it the goodness of the priest involved. But she doesn't see that either has anything to do with herself. She is a most extraordinarily unselfish human being. Let me put this out of the way. Excuse me. So I would never have imagined it would take the priest to free me from such a state, or that my trouble was an extraordinary thing. It's true that when I would lose consciousness, I would see Jesus, but then she attributed that to the Lord, the goodness of the Lord. See how good the Lord is with me, that he comes to give me strength in my state of sufferings. Otherwise, how could I sustain it? Who would give me the strength? It is also true that when such a state was going to occur in the morning during communion. Now, why would it happen during communion? Isn't it because she's receiving Jesus' body, blood, soul and divinity? So going into an ecstatic state with him, that is the normal thing that would happen. He would tell me that during that very state, sufferings would come to me from the Lord himself. And my book says him himself. That's not good English. But I would pay no attention to any of this. Look at her. Extraordinary detachment from what's actually happening to her. Now, most people are not like that. Nowadays, people write books if they see an angel. And that's not the Lord. That's millions of miles away from the Lord. And here's a woman who is having extraordinary experience, and she's saying, no, I won't pay attention to that. The mere thought sometimes of telling the confessor I felt I was the proudest soul that existed in the world if I dared to open my mouth to speak of these things. In other words, she thought it was pride to speak about this extraordinary thing. But we've all personally met people who boast about having had a word from the Lord or a vision, or even if it wasn't a proper vision, it's only a picture. And they boast about having absolutely minor things. And here she's having major stuff and is literally unable to say it to anybody out of humility. Isn't that amazing? And I'd feel such blushing, she said, that it was impossible to say anything to that confessor, no matter how good or holy he was. It's so true that I did not think that it would take the priest to free me, and that this was happening because of the sanctity of my confessor. That when the time came that he went away to the countryside, one morning after communion, the Lord made me understand that I was going to be surprised by that state, inviting me to keep him company and participating in his pains. This is all introduction to her ministry. So she gets a little bit of suffering, she gets a little bit of everything, and gradually then he will ask her, will she commit herself? And Luisa said, Lord, how can I do it? The confessor is not here. Who's going to free me? Maybe you want me to die now. Her greatest desire was to die. And you have to be able to explain that. Some people want to die to get rid of pain. Some people want to die just because they've had financial loss or whatever it is, all the wrong reasons. But if a person has had ecstatic experiences, they've seen the Lord, they have somehow experienced heaven. So the wanting to die is, ecstasy means the soul going out to meet the Lord. Hence they're no longer available in the body. And the wanting to die is that you want to go completely to the Lord. The reason why the Lord has told us all that we must live by faith and not by sight is that we, being much weaker human beings than a person like Luisa, if we had such a vision, we would just die of the ecstasy. Your soul would just say, I don't know, I'm not coming back, and that's it. I'm going. If this is what heaven's like, then goodbye earth. And because he wants us to live the fullness of our existence on the earth, he wants you to complete your journey. He won't give you that vision. It's not because he doesn't love you. It's that he wants you to have all the merits of everything, of all your decisions in your lifetime. So that's why he said to Thomas, blessed are those who have not seen and have believed. It's actually quite important. So the Lord just said, your trust must be only in me. Be resigned, because resignation renders the soul radiant and it keeps all other passions in place. The word that is used for passions here covers all our emotions in such a way that, attracted by those rays of light, I go to that soul and I transform her completely within me, and I give her life from my own life. So the first stage in the journey into the divine will is to be resigned to the divine will. The very first stage. And Jesus says here that makes a soul radiant. Someone who's not resigned is someone who's disturbed and upset, and they have all the consequences of that disturbance. So Luisa said, I resigned myself to his holy will. This is step one. And I offered that communion as the last one in my life. The poor girl, she has 36 volumes to go. I should say 35, since this is the first one. But though resigned, I felt my nature very much. This is just awkward English. It means that even though you resign yourself to the will of God, it doesn't take the pain away. That for the whole day I did nothing but cry and pray the Lord to give me strength. Now, she's still a teenager and tears are easy. In truth, that situation turned out to be so very bitter for me. And without thinking or knowing anything, I found myself with a new and heavy cross. 2 Corinthians 12:8. So while I was in that state of suffering, I would think of nothing but dying and doing the will of God. But as for my family, they also suffered in seeing me in that state. Try and imagine yourself the parent of a teenager who's spending hours and hours and hours in her room all by herself, no matter what, even if she is claiming to be praying and all the rest of it, and not out there socialising or doing the ordinary things that teenagers do. Wouldn't you be sick with worry? Yeah, have pity on her parents. And they know nothing. She has told them nothing. That's the extraordinary thing. So they also suffered in seeing me in that state, and they tried to call some priests. But for one reason or other, they didn't want to come. After 10 days, please underline it, this crisis went on for 10 days. All her trials are huge. After 10 days, the confessor came, who used to confess me when I was a child. And it happened that he too was able to make me come round from that state. Then I realised the net that the Lord had thrown over her, okay? So the Lord wants the church to be involved. Now, you know that there's an expression in St. Paul about a thorn in the side. You know that one? And he said he earnestly prayed to the Lord 3 times to have it removed. And the Lord said, no, my power is at best in weakness. Now, the thorn in Luisa's side for at least 4 to 5 volumes, if not even more, is that the priest has to come to set her free. And she begs the Lord, not 3 times like St. Paul, but more than 33. She keeps on asking the Lord to take this away. She finds this extremely humiliating. And that's why, again, I say to you that while she's willing to take sufferings that the Lord will send to her, the cross she has is that thorn in her side. So from here, a war arose against me on the part of priests. So she's going to have terrible humiliation from priests, because initially the priests just think this is a fussy teenager wanting a priest to waste his time to come to this house and bless her. And then apparently she's okay. So as far as they're concerned, it's all in the head. Now, you can have sympathy for them as well. They don't actually know what's going on, and she hasn't told anybody. So they're working in the dark, so you don't give a heavy criticism to them. They don't know what's going on. Some would say that it was a pretense, and some that beating was needed, because in those days you could beat kids, you know. Some that I wanted to make myself believed a saint. Some would add that I was possessed, and many other things. My goodness, that's not easy to take, is it? And if I tell them all, the story would be too long. So with these ideas in their minds, when sufferings would occur and my family would call one of them, they would have such strange reactions that my poor family suffered very much, especially my poor mother. Sorry, I don't do the Italian mama bit. How many tears she shed for me. Now, it would be a terrible humiliation for a family to have priests coming in and saying all this stuff about your daughter, wouldn't it? So the family is suffering as well. O Lord, rewarder, you yourself, she said. O my good Lord, how much I suffered on this side, you alone know everything. So, who can tell how bitter this situation was for me, that the priest was needed in order to free me from that state of sufferings? How many times I prayed, shedding most bitter tears, that he would free me. So put your 2 Corinthians 12:9 there. No, sorry, my power is at best in weakness. 2 Corinthians 12:9. How many times I made explicit resistance to the Lord. Romans 9:19. Romans 9:19. When he wanted me to offer myself as victim and accept the pains. So the vocation has begun, but she has to have time to really consider it. I would say to him, Lord, promise me that you yourself will free me, and then I'll accept everything. Otherwise, no, I won't accept. And I would resist the first day, the second and the third. But who can resist God? That's your Romans 9 again. He would tell me so many things that in the end I was forced to submit myself to the cross. Other times I would say to him from the heart and with familiarity, Lord, how is it that you've done this? Between you and me, you now want to place a third person. In other words, in a marriage, you don't want a third person, do you? No. A marriage is a very private thing. And a marriage between the soul and God is so private that I'm talking about marriage now, I'm not talking about an early stage in the spiritual life, I'm talking about the spiritual marriage. It's so private that person doesn't want anybody else. And that's the position that Luisa's in. So, why would you want to place a third? That's the priest. And this third does not even want to make himself available. See, we could have been so content, just the two of us. When you wanted me to suffer, I would immediately accept because I would know that you yourself would free me. And there's no need for another hand now. I beg you, free me, and both of us will be more content. But of course, she doesn't know what he's doing. And she's not going to be told until very, very much later. Sometimes he pretended not to hear me. Have you ever had a relationship with a human being? I call that switching on your deaf ear. And he wouldn't tell me anything. At other times he would say, do not fear, I am the one who gives darkness and light. That means trials and blessings. The time of light will come. It is my usual way to manifest my works through the priests. Now there is the first statement for Luisa. The church must be involved. This is going to be a public revelation. It's not going to be just a private thing between herself and Jesus. And therefore, the church has to be involved from the beginning, and the church will do it very reluctantly, very reluctantly. But those of us who are up at volume 7, we have the bishop ordering the priest not to let visitors disturb Luisa, to give her full time with the Lord. So they've shifted and understood the importance of what's actually going on. So Luisa said, I spent 3 or 4 years of these contradictions on the part of priests. That's not funny, is it? 3 or 4 years. Many times they would subject me to very hard trials. Thank God you didn't tell us. They would reach the point of letting me remain in that state of sufferings. That is, listen to this, petrified, incapable of the slightest motion, even of taking a drop of water for up to 18 days. The priests did that. Surely they knew she had to eat and drink to live. Isn't that amazing? The Lord alone knows what I was going through in that state. And after they came, I would not even have the good of hearing them say to me, have patience and do the will of God. Rather, I was reproached for being fussy and disobedient. In other words, that she wasn't minding herself. Oh God, what pain, how many tears I shed. How many times I thought I was disobedient, saying to myself, how can this be? That virtue which is most pleasing to the Lord is so far from me. Now, we're going to hear a lot about obedience, so I won't give it to you now. Because Luisa has to mirror Jesus' own obedience. And I'll give you all the references for that, but not now. What good can a disobedient soul ever do or hope for? Because disobedience means you're not doing the will of God. And the whole issue in everything to do with Luisa is doing the will of God and doing it fully and completely and sacrificially and lovingly. Many times I would lament to our Lord, and at times I reached the point of being resentful. I think it's very interesting. If you read, I think it is the book of Sirach or Ecclesiasticus, and I think it's chapter 37, and it should be the first 5 verses. It'll tell you that resentment is a foul thing and found only with sinners. So look carefully at what she said, that I would reach the point of being resentful, but she's not going to let it happen. The mistake people make who are very early in the spiritual life is that they will nurse a grudge against another person. That means that they have accepted the resentment and they're minding it inside and therefore destroying the relationship with the other person. Whereas forgiveness actually releases the grudge or the resentment. And when he wanted me to accept sufferings, I would resist as much as I could. But when he saw that I would begin to resist, the Lord showed me that he would not pay attention to me and that he would not tell me anything else. He has the most wonderful way of dealing with her. If you want this, then you're going to hear no more messages from me. I'm not going to share anything with you. So you won't get the divine word. But do you know that when we are disobedient to the will of God, the Bible closes to us? The Bible is closed to so many people because they're in disobedience to the Lord. And there are others who are living in union with God, and the Bible reads like a newspaper. We just need to know that the Word of God is not thrown to swine, excuse me, but that he used that example himself. Swine are only interested in their own food. They're not interested in pearls, and they're not interested in precious things. And there are so many people who are so caught up with themselves and their own passions and their own feelings, they don't really care about the great issues of the spiritual life, which is the divine will and loving God and your neighbour. They don't really care about it. And so the Word of God won't be open to them. It's actually quite important to say that. That's why he says, you won't hear the Word of God. I won't tell you anything else. And then all of a sudden he would come to surprise me. As for what the confessor said, that's because sometimes he did not want me to fall into that state, but this was not in my power. So here you have the priest trying to say to Luisa, you don't have to go into this ecstatic state. You can always stay outside. But if the confessor had studied enough of the mystics, he would know that what he said was nonsense. Because most of the mystics have had the experience that they were drawn into ecstasy and there was no way you could resist it, because it's God drawing the soul. Nobody can resist God. And it'll take them a while, meaning years, to realise that they cannot order God and they cannot order this experience. God is free to do what he wants. Yes, it is true that I've been disobedient. In other words, she's caught between the Lord and the confessor ordering her to stay out of ecstasy, which she can't do because the Lord is stronger than her. And that I've always been good for nothing. But I also remember that the most tormenting pain was not being able to obey. Now, if Luisa is to be canonised, she could be canonised for many things. But she could be canonised for this alone, that she lived obedience at such a heroic level at a time when disobedience became very strong in the church. Disobedience. I won't go into that in detail. We can discuss it later if you want. So the Lord has her living obedience to make reparation for the disobedience that's actually in the church. I remember that during this period of time there was the cholera. And one day I prayed my good Jesus to make this scourge cease. And he said to me, I will content you as long as you accept offering yourself to suffer whatever I want. In other words, here's the second invitation to be a victim soul. And Luisa said to him, Lord, no, I cannot. You know how they think. They are the priests. And I want you to put Galatians 1:10 there. If this thing could pass only between you and me, I would be absolutely ready to accept everything. And he said to me, my daughter, if I had thought of what men were thinking and of what they were going to do to me, I could not have operated the redemption of mankind. In other words, he's saying to her, if you're thinking of what other people are thinking of you, you wouldn't do anything. If they've nothing against you, they'll make it up. You've never experienced that, have you? I have. And that's exactly what they did to Jesus. They actually made up sins to accuse him of. Yeah, they actually made it up. And if people have a grudge against you for whatever reason they have, they'll decide you're blah, 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 whether you are or not. And that's what's going on in their heads. And Jesus says, if you are going to govern your life with what other people are doing in their heads, you'll never do anything. Ever. You've got to go through the storm and you've got to take the battering of the winds. So we're now dealing with the subject of handling opposition. Very good for us. Put a little heading there, dealing with opposition on that paragraph. So whenever I can, I'll give you a heading for a paragraph because it breaks up the text for you. So Luisa said no. He said then I couldn't operate redemption if I was thinking of others, what they were doing in their heads. But I had my eyes fixed on their salvation and the great love that devoured me. Now, beside that, before I even move on, I want you to put Hebrews 12:2. Hebrews 12:2. That is, for the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross, despising the shame. In other words, he kept his eyes on the goal. If you think of someone who wants to be a pilot, they won't think of all the trouble they have to go through to get there. They'll think of the fact that one day I'll take a plane off the ground and I'll be running that machine. That's what they keep the goal on. If you think of a couple getting married, the day of the marriage is absolutely wonderful, but the hassle for a year and a half before it is unbelievable. And everything that has to be organised and things that can go wrong and have to change. And they don't think of any of that. All they think of is, that's the day we're getting married. That's what Jesus is saying to her. You think of the goal. You don't think of the preparation that leads up to it. And he's going to show us this as we go along in the writings, that if we would only keep our eyes on Jesus and accomplishing the will of God, everything is fine. When I would see people who were thinking ill about me, Jesus said, and who caused occasion to make me suffer more, I would offer those very pains that they gave me for their own salvation. That's a major revelation at this particular point. Major revelation. That not only do you not react negatively to the people who are causing you pain, but you take it and you, in the divine will, you offer it in reparation for those very people. So I want to give you Matthew 5, 43 to 48. Matthew 5, 43 to 48. He starts off by saying, I want you to be perfect like your heavenly Father. And Matthew 5, 11 to 12. And I also want to give you Proverbs 25, 22. Proverbs 25, 22. Now, have you forgotten, Jesus said, that what I want from you is the imitation of my life. Now, you're getting a description of her vocation. And that I will make you share in everything I suffered. Don't you know that the most beautiful act, the most heroic and the most pleasing to me, which you must offer to me, is that of offering yourself for the very ones who are against you. In other words, that's what Jesus did. That's what you're to do. So that's Luke 6:12 and following. Luke 6:12 and following. So Luisa said I remained mute. In other words, there was nothing to say, do you know? I didn't know what to answer. I accepted everything the Lord wanted, and so in the evening I was surprised by that state of sufferings, and I remained in it for 3 consecutive days. That means no food and no water for 3 days. Just so do you understand the consequences? Then after I came round, I no longer heard anything about the cholera. Isn't that interesting? So she has now been given her first taste of the power of suffering for others. After this, I received another mortification, and this was having to change confessor, because since he was a religious, he was called back to the convent. I love the way referring to the men's monastery as a convent. Mm-hmm. I was content with him, and most of the dins mentioned above, which occurred when he was in the countryside. Now, the dins are all the opposition that other priests who have to fill in for him, who don't want to fill in, and they're not interested in this woman who seems to be very strange to them. And she said all of that would happen when this priest was away in the countryside, especially during the last year when he was my confessor. Because of the cholera spreading in town, he spent only 6 months here. My confessor did not give many reproaches. He would let me remain in that state of sufferings for 1 day, and then he would come round. So it was less than a month since he had withdrawn to the countryside, and it became known that he was leaving. This was painful for me, not because I was attached, but because of the necessity I had for him. So I went to the Lord and I told him of my pain, and I said to him, I do not want you to afflict, he said, I do not want you to afflict yourself because of this. I am the master of hearts, and I can turn them and turn them again if I please. Now that's Romans 9, 14 to 18. Romans 9, 14 to 18. If he did some good for you, it has been nothing but a vessel which he received from me and gave to you. That's Acts 9, 5. So I will do it with others. Psalm 27, 1. Why do you fear? The Lord is my light and my salvation. Why should I fear? My dear, look at, you're going to have some lovely endearments between the two of them. But when you get Luisa calling him my dear, that's when it gets funny. As long as you keep turning your eye now to the right, then to the left, and you set it on something now and then on something else, and you don't have your eye fixed on me, you will not be able to walk speedily on the way to heaven. Let me give you that in plain English. He says, if you're looking at everybody else and what they're doing and what they're not doing and consequences of that, if A moves and B doesn't and blah, 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 he said, you're not going anywhere. But he said, if you want to walk quickly on the way to heaven, keep your eyes on me. And that piece of information is for everybody. And it has been the motto of most of the saints, all eyes on Jesus. That's quite literally their motto, all eyes on Jesus. On the contrary, you will always be limping and you will not be able to follow the influence of grace. Therefore, I want you to look at all things that surround you with holy indifference, remaining all intent on me alone. So I put Psalm 62 beside that. Rest in God, my soul. From him comes my strength. I'm like a tottering wall and a tumbling fence, but rest in God, my soul. He is my strength. So after these words, my heart acquired so much strength that I suffered little or nothing from such a great loss. In other words, the beautiful thing about Luisa is that when the Lord tells her something, she actually does it. In doing it, she realises the extraordinary wisdom with which she is being guided. And so there's another text that you have to put over the whole thing rather than any one particular thing, and that is Deuteronomy 32:15. Deuteronomy 32:15. And Deuteronomy says, the Lord alone was her guide. And so she's been guided by divine wisdom. And as soon as she does what the Lord asks her to do, she immediately sees that this was the correct thing to do, and she grows. So it happened that I changed confessor, and I returned to the confessor who used to confess me when I was little. Now, she doesn't realise this is going to be an extraordinary grace for her, because he'll be the first person she actually confides in. But may the Lord be always blessed who uses those very paths which appear to be contrary to us. Now, do you see it? It seemed as if it was the wrong thing to do. It was actually the right thing. Almost as if they were to harm the soul, but it's for our greater good and for his glory. And so it happened that I began to open my soul. This is the very first time she tells anybody what's going on. So it's a major step forward for her, a new stage in her life. Since up to that time, I had not said anything to anyone. Pity her parents and everybody else. They were supposed to know what to do without knowing what was going on. And Luisa couldn't see that, that wasn't exactly just. As much effort as I would make over myself, I just couldn't do it, she said. Even more, I would see myself more impotent to tell of the things of my interior. The blushing I felt at the mere thought of telling these things was such that I felt it would have been easier for me to tell the ugliest sins. Where this came from, I don't know. It actually comes from a very deep humility, and she doesn't realise it. From the confessor, I don't think so, because he was so good, trustful, sweet, patient, and listening. He would take a most exact care of my soul. He would have his eye on everything so that I might walk straight. From me, I don't think so either, because I felt a block over my soul. Now, that's the bit you need to mark. In other words, this was the time to open her soul. It wasn't the time before now. And that's the block. That's very interesting, isn't it? And I had all the will to free myself and to hear at least what the confessor thought about it, but I felt it was impossible for me to do it. To me, I think this was an intervention of the Lord, and she's correct. She's very good at discerning. This was God's kairos time for intervention. So, finding myself with a new confessor, I began to open my interior, little by little. Many times the Lord commanded me to manifest to the confessor what he had told me, and when I wouldn't do it, the Lord would scold me and would reproach me severely. So notice it is God's time, and it was this priest that the Lord wanted her to open up to. because she got no scolding in not telling anybody else. So she gets the scolding now, meaning this is the time, go and do it. And at time he reached the point of telling me that I didn't do it, he would come no more. And that's the best way to treat her. I won't come back, which is the most bitter pain for me, such that all others' pains compared to this seem to be nothing but blades of straw. Therefore, the fear that he really would not come was so great that I did as much as I could in order to manifest my interior. Now, look at the level of stimulus she needed to be able to do it. It's true that many times this cost me very much, but the fear of losing my dear Jesus would make me overcome everything. Now, I want to make a big jump to volume 7, where one of her confessors, not this one of her confessors had died. And when she went into an ecstasy, she saw him, because she sees souls in purgatory and everybody. And she sees saints in heaven as well. And he's obviously not in heaven. He's in purgatory. And he said to her, "Oh, will you tell me again what Jesus is saying to you?" He said, "I lived on what Jesus was saying to you." She had no idea that she was feeding them and turning them into saints. She had no idea at all. And there's the most wonderful dialogue between the two of them. And he told her that he was obviously in a very high place in purgatory. You know, he was only in for a visit, if you know what I mean. And he said that all the people around him were all benefiting from all the acts in the divine will that he did. And he said, I'm showing or manifesting stars to them. And Luisa's not a bit shy when she's in an out-of-the-body experience. And she said, "Well, show me then." And so he opened his breast, and so far as you can if you're a spirit, and she saw all these stars flowing out and going out to all the other souls in purgatory. And he said, "They're all benefiting, the whole lot of them." So he said, "Give me another one today so that I can share it with them." Isn't that beautiful? That's why I just wanted to jump here and give you a taste of what's coming, because she's going to have an absolutely incredible effect on the priests who actually are guiding her. So, I don't know where I stopped. I was also pushed by the confessor, thank you, to say where such a state was coming from. So this is the first time the confessor now is asking for discernment. And what happened to me when I was in that state of doziness, which is ecstasy, what was the cause of it? He would then command me to manifest it and force me through the precepts of obedience, and also place before me the fear that I might be living in illusion and deceit, living within myself, while if I manifested it to the priest, I would be more certain and tranquil. So the priest is now learning that he must pull this out of her so that real discernment can be made. And Luisa doesn't realise that the priests go to the bishop and say, "This is what's going on, this is what this woman is experiencing," so that there's more discernment. And in no time at all, it got to the Vatican. Because, she wasn't living that far away. So that's what the Lord had wanted, was to get the church involved, right up to the very top. So, because the Lord never permits that the priest be mistaken when the soul is obedient. Look at that for a statement. That is a priest giving spiritual direction to a soul. So Jesus Christ pushed me from one side and the confessor from the other. And it seemed to me that sometimes they were banding together, the two of them, the confessor and Jesus. And so I managed to manifest my soul. The past confessor couldn't do that. He would not ask me a question. You see, so the Lord couldn't use him then for discernment. He would not try to know what was happening to me in that state of doziness. And so I myself did not know how to come out and talk about these things. Now, saints who have had these very profound experiences have all needed somebody else to pull it out of them, because they're so caught up in what actually happened. They can't just objectively talk about it. And so somebody pulling it out of them enables them to actually see it and discern it and appreciate it. So the concern he had, the last confessor, was that I would be resigned and conformed to the will of God, bearing the cross that the Lord had given to me. So much so that if sometimes he saw me a little bothered, he would suffer great sorrow. Isn't that interesting? He would suffer sorrow, but he wouldn't say anything to her. Isn't that amazing? In other words, that he appreciated what was going on, but he didn't want to penetrate into the mystery. And so it happened that I spent about another year with this confessor in the same state described above, so revealing her soul. And since the confessor knew where the state of sufferings was coming from, he told me that Jesus wanted me to have sufferings, that I should go to him. Oh yes, if Jesus wanted sufferings, she was to go to the priest and ask for an obedience. I remember that one morning after communion, the Lord told me, "Daughter, the iniquities that are committed are so many that the scale of my justice is about to overflow." Now, she is beginning a process that continues for most of her life, and that is that the Lord will tell her the condition of the church and the condition of humanity and the reason why wars will come and the reason why chastisements have to come. So beside that, I want you to put Amos 3:7. Amos 3:7 says that the Lord never does anything without revealing it to the prophets first. And you see, as you go along here, if you were looking at this as someone trying to discern this person, you'd say, yes, there's another sign, there's another sign, there's another sign. And the prophetic part of it is one of the signs of an authentic relationship with God. Know that I will pour heavy scourges upon men, especially a most fierce war. Now, the most fierce war, can you guess? World War I. It was supposed to be the war that to end all wars. Isn't that what they said? And it didn't end anything. A most fierce war. Now, in the Old Testament, war is always a punishment from God. Meted out by human beings, but a punishment from God. So a most fierce war then would be a punishment. We've had two major ones in the 20th century. So, a most fierce war in which I will make a slaughter of human flesh. At least 70 million people died in World War I. That's a mighty slaughter. He continued almost crying, I gave bodies to men that they might be as many sanctuaries where I would go to delight in them. Now that's going to be explained more and more and more as you go on in the volumes. That we were created for God. He made us like him so that he could come and dwell in us on the earth. And that's why Genesis 3 says that God walked with Adam in the cool of the day. And that Proverbs 8:31 says that God delights to be in the company of human beings. So there were meant to be many sanctuaries where I would go to delight in them. But they've turned out to be sewers of rot, which emanate such stench as to force me to stay far away from them. Okay, so this is volume 1. I need to explain something, and it'll fit all the other volumes as well. If you just look at me for a minute, I'm going to raise my hands. I'm saying this in words because it's going on to this. I'm going to raise my hands. This is sin rising up from the earth, and it goes up to God. But nothing unholy or unworthy can ever enter the presence of God. That's Hebrews 12:14. So the sins are sent back to us as chastisement. So look at it as a fountain. We actually create the chastisements. And he will explain that in great detail as we go on. But to put a little smile on it, if you can put smile on chastisements, I say that the Lord has a post office up there and it says, return to sender. We're not having this up here. This doesn't belong to paradise. This stinks. We're not having it. Send it back. And so you'll come to realise that chastisement is something you bring on yourself. We even use that language ourselves. We say, that man is his own worst enemy. Don't we? Yeah, he's bringing on the trouble on himself, or that woman is her own worst enemy, or whatever. Or that child's going to have trouble if he or she continues like that. And what we're saying is that the actions that they're doing and the decisions they're making are going to bring terrible trouble on them. And they do. And that's the meaning of chastisement. But you'll hear an awful lot about chastisement in these writings. Chastisement is a severe mercy. Chastisement isn't judgment. Judgment is a different thing to chastisement. World War I was a judgment. World War II is another one. And they fit very well the two waves of trouble that you hear of in the book of Revelation. And there's a third one coming. If you think there isn't going to be a third world war, then you're not discerning anything. So the Lord tells her that the human race has become sewers of rot and emanate such a stench as to force me to stay far away from them. Now, the greatest punishment that God can give, and I'm not going to go into this one now, is to withdraw his presence. Because God will not be around where stink is. And if I say that, then you know automatically that every moment of Jesus' life on this earth was pure agony for him. Because he could see everybody's sin. He could see their wrong motivations. He could know exactly what the enemies were thinking and saying about him and plotting against him and everything. And he had come to shed his blood to save these people. So it must have been unbelievable. You know, it must have been like walking in the sewers, to use his own language here. See what a recompense I receive for so much love and for so many pains that I have suffered for them. Who has ever been treated like me? He said, no one. But what is the cause? It's the excessive love that I have for them. Do you remember that statement? It's Isaiah 53, I think it is. He was hated without cause. Yeah. Therefore, I will try to get through to them with chastisements. You see, my book says I will try with chastisements. You need to add the words, get through to them. I will try and break through to them with chastisements. Do you see that? Yeah. So the book says I will try with chastisements, but it means I will try to get through to them with chastisements. So Louisa's response was, she said that her heart split with pain. It seemed to me that the offences that they were giving him were so many that in order to escape, he wanted to hide within me, almost to find a refuge. Now, you'll understand that much better in the higher volumes when each one of us goes into the divine will and he makes each one of us a sanctuary and he can live on the earth in us. Why? Because we're doing the divine will. And so he finds a home on earth, which is what he wants. And it's in that home that he works and reaches out to others. So, I also felt such pains because men were to be chastised, that it seems that I myself was to suffer, not them. Even more, it seemed to me that if I could, it would have been more bearable for me to suffer all of the chastisements than to see others suffer. See her love for her neighbour. Now, we know with regard to our family, if you're a parent and seeing a child really suffer, you'd prefer to go through it yourself than see the child helplessly suffer, wouldn't you? Yeah. But she has that level of love for the human race. And that's what's going to drive her to suffer the pains of the crucifixion. So you're dealing with a very high level of love of neighbour here. I tried to compassionate him. Now, every time the word compassionate comes, you won't hear it from me. I tried to sympathise with him. That's the words we use. As much as I could, and with all my heart I said to him, O holy spouse, hold back the scourges which your justice has prepared. If the multiplicity of the iniquities of men is great, there is the immense sea of your blood in which you can bury them. In this way, your justice will be satisfied. I've put John 11:45 there. John 11:45. If you have nowhere to go and delight yourself, she said, come into me. I give you all of my heart. Now, that's exactly what he's looking for. And it's Deuteronomy 6. Deuteronomy 6, 4-10. Now, when you're dealing with the first 4 volumes, Deuteronomy 6, 4-10 is all over the place. So you need to know the words. I know you know them. As soon as I say them, you'll recognise them. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one Lord, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart. Notice the all your soul, all your mind, and all your being. You see, it's the little all. The problem with most of us who are not like Luisa is we love him with a bit of our hearts and a bit of our soul and a bit of our minds and a bit of our... But if he's going to do great things through us, we need to give him the all. And he says, if you give me your all, I give you my all. And my answer to that is, who gets the best bargain? I do. I'm not going to say no to that. So Deuteronomy 6:4-10 is fulfilled in a person living in the divine will. So I give you all of my heart, she said, that you may somehow rest and delight in it. It's true that I am also a bilge of vices. Now, she's exaggerating there. She's at a very high level. She really should be saying, I'm a weak human being. But you can purify me and make me what you want. But oh, please placate yourself. If the sacrifice of my life is necessary, oh, how gladly I would make it for you, as long as I may see your own images spared. Your own images now is, first of all, Genesis 1:27. Genesis 1:27 and Romans 8:29. Genesis 1:27 says we were made in the image of God, and Romans 8:29 is that in redemption we are transformed into the image of the Son, Jesus. Now, when Luisa talks to Jesus about your own images, when human beings are really rotten and stinking, as he has just said, he's looking at sort of that lot. You know what I mean? And she said, no. They are your own images. They were made like you. So she has immediately got round him to look at it from a completely different angle. And she uses this as a lever to make intercession for the human race. She's very clever. She knows exactly what to do. I don't know how she got to this stage. She was absolutely incredible to me. So they are your own images, she said, they have to be spared. And the Lord interrupting, my book says my speaking. Is that what you have? Yes. Knock that out. He interrupted me. That's English. Interrupting me, continued, here is exactly where I wanted you. Now he has managed to get her just very gently to come to this point. It's fantastic. If you offer yourself to suffer, he said, no longer every now and then as up to now, but continuously every day for a certain length of time, I will spare them. There's a new stage in her development as a victim soul. So not every now and then, but continuously. See how I will do it. I will put you between my justice and the iniquities of the creatures. That's extremely important. That is Psalm 106:23. Psalm 106:23, it's called Standing in the Breach. Very important. And if you go back to the book of Exodus, for example, they say that if Moses hadn't stood in the breach, the people would never have survived the experience of the wilderness. But Moses all the time would stand between them and God and would intercede for them. And Moses would humble himself to God all the time and come back with God's message to them. So, I will put you between my justice and the iniquities of creatures. Now, Saint Therese of Lisieux died just before Luisa started writing this. And Therese had offered herself to divine mercy. Now, Luisa's being asked to offer herself to divine justice, which is a much harder vocation. Now, Therese really did suffer, but this is a much higher vocation to be asked to stand before divine justice. And when my justice sees itself full of iniquities to the point of not being able to contain them, and is forced to send thunderbolts of the scourges in order to chastise the creatures means the human race, in finding you in the middle, instead of striking them, it'll strike you. You see, the person standing in the middle takes the punishment, like that's Jesus on the cross or in the Passion, taking the punishment and therefore setting us free. So it's an extraordinary love for humanity. Only in this way will I be able to be content in sparing human beings. Otherwise, no. So Luisa remained all confused. She said she didn't know what to say. My nature would do its part, being frightened and trembling, but I saw that my good Jesus was waiting for an answer, whether I would accept or not. Now, Luisa said something very important there. Her human nature is the same as yours and mine. We run from suffering. The moment you get a headache, you say, where's the paracetamol? You don't say, how can I make reparation for the human race? That is a grace that comes to you eventually. There are a number of people in the Divine Will groups at this moment who are ill or suffering in various ways. And the extraordinary thing is every one of them is full of joy. Every one of them has spontaneously said they're offering it in reparation and substitution. It's a sure sign they're living in Divine Will. But the ordinary folks, they'll run for the paracetamol. Some of the rest of us don't have paracetamol in the house. It's not useful anymore. Souls are. I hope I will be throwing challenges out to you. Souls are. You've got to start thinking differently. Absolutely differently. And have the privilege that there will be souls in heaven because you didn't take the paracetamol. I'm just using that as an example. There could be other examples. But it's really thrilling to me that these people, there's about 5 of them that I could name, but I don't want to name because of this. And that's been the spontaneous reaction, which I think is fantastic. So, seeing myself almost forced to speak, Luisa said, I said to him, "Oh, my most divine spouse, on one hand, I'm ready to accept, but how is it going to work with the confessor?" She's worried about him having to come all the time. If he doesn't want to come every once in a little while, how can it be possible that he'd come every day? Free me from this cross. See it? Cross. That's the thorn in the side. That the confessor is needed in order to free me, and then everything will be arranged between me and you. And the Lord said to me, go to the confessor and ask him for the obedience. If he wants, you will tell him everything I told you, and you will follow whatever he says. See, it will not be only for the good of creatures that I want these continuous sufferings, but also for your good. In other words, she will grow hugely in sanctity very fast. In this state of sufferings, I will purify your soul thoroughly. Now, this woman is living in a very high state of union. But you see, none of us have any inkling of what the purity of God is like. And to get very close to God, all of us need a horrendous amount of purification. So if you're going to heaven on cushions, get worried. If you're having trials and difficulties, the Lord is purifying you. But if you're getting absolutely nothing and everything's going your way and nothing opposes you or anything, I'd be really worried. Because all of us have to have our souls thoroughly purified in such a way as to dispose you to form a mystical marriage with me. And after this, I will make the last transformation in such a way that both of us will become like 2 candles placed on the fire. One is transformed into the other. And they become one. Now, if you put 2 candles on the fire, you will not be able to separate the different waxes. The only way you'd know you had 2 candles, because both of them will melt, is that if one of them was purple and the other one was white, that you'd actually see the mixture of the colours. That's the only way you'd know. So one will be transformed into the other and they will become one. Beside that, you should put John 14:21. You in me and I in you, both completely one. In this way, I will transform myself in you, and you will remain crucified with me. Galatians 5:24, I'm crucified with Christ. Would you not be happy if you could say the bridegroom is crucified, but the bride is also crucified? Ah, yes, there's nothing that renders me dissimilar to him. So, when I was able to speak to the confessor, Luisa said, I told him everything that the Lord had told me, and since the Lord had said to me the words, for a certain given time, this is wonderful, because it takes people ages and a lot of experience before they actually know what God is saying to them. And so Luisa gives the priest the impression that a certain given time is a certain given time. And then you'll hear very shortly that she was 12 years in bed. That's not a certain given time. Without notifying me of the exact time during which I was to suffer continuously, I took it to be about 40 days more or less. In other words, a Lenten period. And now it has been 12 years since I continue to be in bed. May God be always blessed. May his inscrutable judgments be always adored. Now there is a very important statement that when mysteries are happening in our lives, instead of going into a tizzy, instead of rationalising the whole thing, that we would just simply adore God's dispositions for us. That's Romans 11:33. That we literally adore his ways. I believe that if the blessed Lord had made me understand clearly the length of time I was to be in bed, and as she's writing this, she has no idea that she's going to spend 64 years in bed. If she knew that, she couldn't do it at all. And this is the great mercy of God, that he shows us life just one day at a time, and why it is so wrong for people to go to fortune tellers and all the rest of it. Because if, for example, a fortune teller told you you'll have a car accident in a week, what would you do for God in that week? You might do nothing. You might just give up. And you might take it as a fatalistic statement. Many people allow their lives to be guided by these false prophets and very dangerous things. But the Lord, in his great mercy, gives you life in 24-hour doses. And the amazing thing is, he can take it in 24-hour doses. But if you look back over a long period of suffering, you say, I couldn't have gone through that if I knew the length. And it's the same with Luisa. My nature would have been frightened very much and would hardly have submitted to it. Already I remember that I have always been resigned. At that time I did not know the preciousness of the cross. That's another very important revelation she's going to get. Suffering is one thing, but the preciousness of the cross and the power of it is quite another matter altogether, as the Lord made me know during the course of those 12 years. Nor would the confessor have adapted to give me the obedience if he had known, because, how could a priest give you permission to sit in a bed when you're in the whole of your health? The only illness Luisa ever had was the pneumonia from which she died. So I said to the confessor that the Lord wanted to give me the obedience to remain in continuous suffering for about 40 days, and I told him all the rest. To my surprise, because I thought it was impossible, the confessor told me that if it really was the will of God, he would give me the obedience. Now here's the priest beginning to receive big grace and enlightenment from the Lord. Because he said, in reality it wasn't that he couldn't come, but it was rather a bit of human respect. Now there you have the priest confessing to Luisa that he could come, but he was afraid of what everybody else would say to him. My soul rejoiced very much that I would be able to make the Lord content, and therefore have human beings spared. But my nature was very much afflicted in receiving this obedience, so much so that for a few days I was very saddened. In other words, what teenager wants to sit in a bed doing nothing? Isn't the first thing you hear from a kid as soon as they are running around the place, I'm bored, they need to be occupied. So she actually suffered very much from it. My soul also was affected very much, thinking that I was to remain for such a long time without being able to receive Jesus in the sacrament. Now, in these writings, the sacrament means Holy Communion, and you just need to make sure you write it down, that it's not misunderstood. You would get the impression that there wasn't 6 other sacraments. And so the thing that's worrying her is she won't get to Mass and she won't get Holy Communion. Eventually, of course, they will put a little altar in her room and she'll have Mass in her room. At times I would feel a war so very fierce within me that I myself did not know what had happened to me. The devil too would add many things, but my good Jesus put a remedy to everything, and this is how he did it. Now, all of a sudden, there is a break in the story. We're not going to pick up this story for quite a few pages, because the priest has intervened, and the priest has suddenly realised that this woman is receiving different types of communication from God. And so he asks her to write out for him the different ways in which God communicates with her. So I want you to put a heading over the next bit, the ways in which the Lord spoke to Luisa. The ways in which the Lord spoke to Luisa. And when we're finished that, then we'll go back to the story again. So, by order of the current confessor, I move on to speak about something else. I will obey in manifesting the various ways in which the Lord has spoken to me. This is wonderful teaching now. It seems to me that the ways in which the Lord has spoken to me are 4. Notice how clear she is. But these 4 ways of Jesus' speaking, she says, communication, I think, is the better word. The 4 ways of Jesus' communication are very different from inspirations. Inspirations are normal for everybody. So number 1, the first way is when the soul goes out of herself. However, first I want to explain a little bit better about the going out of myself. It happens in 2 ways. This is the out of the body experience now. And I have a query. I can't give you an absolute answer. Is this the flight of the spirit that John of the Cross speaks about? I just haven't come to an absolute conclusion about it. It happens in 2 ways. The first is instantaneous, almost in a flash, and it's so sudden that it seemed to me that the body would lift a little. That's levitation. It would lift a little bit from the bed in order to follow the soul, and then it would stay there. And it seemed to me that the body would remain as dead while the soul would follow Jesus, walking throughout the whole universe. Watch this. The earth, the air, the seas, the mountains, purgatory, heaven. And many times he showed me the place where I would be after I die. She was taken to heaven and everywhere. She was also taken to hell at one point. The other way then is for the soul to go out is more quiet. So we would call this ecstasy. It seems that the body dozes off insensibly and remains as though petrified at the presence of Jesus Christ. However, the soul remains within the body, hence no flight of the spirit. Do you see why I'm bringing that subject in? And the body no longer feels anything of external things, even if all the universe turned it upside down, even if they burnt me up and reduced me to pieces. The person is not available to the body in this ecstatic state. You see this from the children at Garabandal as well. That was quite clear, wasn't it? These 2 ways are so different of going out of myself that I have noticed sensibly, because in the first way, having to obey the confessor when he would come to wake me up, I would see him from the place where Jesus would lead me. Now, this is one of the funny things that you're going to be reading, funny as in smiling, in these early volumes, where Luisa will be in an out of the body experience, and the Lord, she won't want to come back, and the Lord will say, but there's your confessor, he's coming for you. And she would see the confessor, and she's got to get back into the body before the confessor gets to the bed, otherwise she hasn't obeyed, and you have this tussle going on. It's actually quite funny. The relationship between Luisa and Jesus is absolutely wonderful. It's very real, and the Lord is teaching us all through it that he is genuinely relating to us as a real person. It's just we don't see him, but everything is real. So I would see the priest from the place where Jesus would lead me. That is, from the ends of the earth. Imagine that. From the air or from the mountains or the sea or purgatory or even heaven itself. Now I want to stop there for a second. This woman has to make a desperate sacrifice of herself to sit in a bed for 64 years. Now, human nature couldn't endure that. So what does the Lord do? Give her out of the body experiences, so she's travelling the earth. And not only travelling through the stars and going to heaven and purgatory and everything else. That is the balance. We have to have balance. You know, Padre Pio had bilocation, you know that, don't you? And his community used to tease him and say, you're the only one who can get around obedience. The rest of us have to ask permission to go places, but you just go anyway. And he said, but my body is obeying. The body stays there, you know. But I just want to point out that the balance is actually very essential for her psychological survival. You have to have balance. We have to have light and darkness, and you have to have day and night, and you have to have things happening and all the rest of it. That's absolutely essential to our being. You'll be told in the higher volumes that life is in the motion. So she needs the motion. So even more, it would seem to me that I would not have the time to let the confessor find my soul in the body, and therefore I'd not be able to obey. It seemed that so far away as I was with my soul, I say it seemed, that I would bustle about and become all anxious and worried that I mightn't be able to get myself to be found there for the confessor on time. That's the bit I was saying to you. And therefore I wouldn't be able to obey. However, I confess that I've always been there on time. God is never in a hurry, but he's always on time. And it seemed to me that my soul would enter the body just before. You need to add in the word just before the confessor would begin to give me the obedience to wake up. In other words, at the last possible second. That's why the English requires the word just before. I'll just finish this little bit. We won't go on to number 2. Even more, I tell you the truth, many times from afar, I could see the confessor coming. But in order not to leave Jesus, it seemed that I would not be thinking that the confessor was coming. But then Jesus himself would hurry me to return with the soul into my body so as to be able to obey the confessor. And then I would feel great reluctance about leaving Jesus, but obedience would win. And upon leaving Jesus, he himself either kissed me or embraced me, or would do something else to take leave of me. In other words, it's a real relationship. And I, upon leaving my dear Jesus, would say to him, I go to the confessor, but you, my good Jesus, come back soon as the confessor goes away. She cannot endure being without him. And the only thing that I say to people in Volume 1 is, this reminds me of a young couple in love, and the boy has just gone home, and the girl phones him before he gets into the car. You just can't be without each other. So she's now going to talk about intellectual dialogue, but I might leave that till next week. So I think we should stop there.